it highlights the fact that, change is a reality, and sometimes change can be disruptive, and with change comes threats, but there are also opportunities. So it's being quick off the mark to be able to pivot your business model to ensure that it is aligned with whatever the current market demands.
Hello and welcome to the AOU podcast, Entrepreneurial Leadership in Africa, where we explore more on being a bold entrepreneur leader. I'm your host, Savannah Olo, and today I have with me Michael Abtar. Michael is the founder and CEO of IG Smart, based in London. He uses his experience and expertise in global data privacy and protection to give us insight on why we should care about data privacy and cybersecurity, not only in our businesses, but also in our homes. He further highlights key takeaways from his transition from being a lawyer to an award-winning CEO of a GDPR Consultancy of the Year 2020 and Best Cybersecurity Consultancy Firm 2019. Michael is also an international speaker when he's not running his company by day. He's done quite a number of keynotes and has moderated plenary discussions at global data protection conferences. Speaking of key things to note, he is very passionate about Africa and the role it plays in data protection and privacy. Do you know what GDPR does for you as an entrepreneur? Well, stay tuned and know it all. Join us as we uncover a whole new world from our diverse community of entrepreneurial leaders. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Michael Abtar. So, Michael, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today on the AOU podcast. Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure. I was particularly keen to accept the invitation. Having myself met with ALU students, including yourself, Savannah, and been highly impressed with what I have heard and seen from you.
Thank you so much. So, as an award-winning CEO of global data privacy and a global data privacy and protection expert, can we start by defining what these keywords are? What is global data privacy and protection?
So, in essence, if we look at this within the business, a context of modern global business and how organizations operate and the flows of data across the globe between different partners, different suppliers and vendors, different institutions and agencies, it's effectively governing the way that data is processed and handled to ensure that the rights of individuals are respected, and that data is effectively kept secure and accurate and up to date and accessible to the people that need to have that information to fulfill whatever legitimate tasks they're seeking to fulfill.
Right. So why data privacy and cybersecurity? Like, what drove you there?
It started really having kind of qualified and graduated from law school and practiced law across a variety of disciplines. I was always passionate about human rights, and with data privacy here within Europe and the UK, it's enshrined, and as it is within many other parts of the world, enshrined within the law that the right to privacy is a fundamental human right. And working with an organization over, I think, 13 years ago, I was as a law graduate in a position in a local authority here in the UK. I was exposed to data protection and also freedom of information laws. And it was at a time when many organizations were still in the process of digitizing things and moving from paper-based economies. And I saw really the potential that I thought it was going to be an area of growth. I also saw that there were significant gaps in the market in terms of people's ability to readily interpret the law into a practical context for different organizations and businesses and their ways of working. So really, I think after about a year of doing some ad hoc consultancy in the space, I decided to establish IG Smart.
Right. So IG Smart was started in 2009, am I correct?
Yes.
And that was a year right after the financial crisis. So what was the entrepreneurial climate looking like for you at that time? And considering like, starting a business and looking into data privacy and cybersecurity as well.
A very good question because yeah, it was a critical point. I think economically, both at a global level, but on a personal level, it was quite a challenging time to embark on a journey to start up a business. I was fortunate in that there was an organization that had offered a contract to deliver some services that I was confident enough that with that client, it was a starting point. So essentially started with a single client and a single contract, and developed from there.
And over 10 years later, you have this amazing platform for you to share your consultancy skills and, apply all the things that you've learned over the years.
Most definitely. In that time, I've had the great pleasure of being able to build a very diverse and talented team of multidisciplinary professionals that all have domain expertise for cybersecurity and data privacy. And we now operate with our clients operate in over 150 different countries. So we truly are a global business in terms of our presence. And whilst back to your point around the financial crisis at the time, there was still lots of programs and projects that involved integration of disparate systems between businesses and between healthcare organizations, between banks. There was still lots of data breaches and cyber security attacks. So it didn't really, I think, have a significant impact on this particular industry.
Thank you for that. In your opinion, why should young entrepreneurs or young entrepreneurial leaders rather care about data protection and privacy?
It essentially has become a core tenet of doing business. As you set out as an entrepreneur, you will soon discover, just for example, when responding to tenders or when having conversations with prospective clients, particularly well established organizations and the kind of global corporates, they will insist upon you having adequate data protection policies, procedures, processes, and technological control measures in place to assure them that their data that you will be processing, and that may simply be their employees' contact information, or if you're going to be involved in a business that's going to be processing particularly sensitive information, then that level of assurance that your partners and clients will want to receive from you is going to be a fundamental requirement for doing business in the modern global digital context.
Right. Wow. All right. So, as I mentioned earlier, you started IG Smart right after the financial crisis. And currently, we are in another crisis, or rather, the pandemic, COVID-19. How has that shaped the evolution of when you started and how you're handling the situation now? Like, what are the key differences that you've seen as you've, grown your company throughout the years?
So I think it's twofold somewhat for us in that prior to COVID-19, we already, I would say 95% of the work that we did for our clients was remote because they are based in various parts of the world. So it didn't have a significant impact in terms of ways of working. It did. We had some projects that were scheduled to happen. For example, we were supposed to travel to Asia, and a project in the Middle East, and those things didn't happen just because of travel restrictions.
Yeah.
But what for us, where the focus shifted, is we work extensively in with local and central government organisations and within the UK NHS, and also with international healthcare organisations, and lots
Right.
of healthcare tech companies as well, and shifted focus towards helping them, and had a number of organizations approach us to help them kind of solve quite significant national challenges with COVID-19, and how they could effectively process information to be able to identify people at risk, trace the people's exposure levels to COVID-19, and for people to return safely to work, using technologies to be able to determine whether or not somebody has COVID-19 symptoms. So there are lots of complex data privacy and security challenges that when you're looking at kind of population level pandemics. So we got heavily involved in some national programs there, and also lots of businesses have in general, just outside of healthcare, be they the fintech organizations that we
Yeah.
service, or construction industry, or local government organizations, they're forced to now work remotely. So that has also created increased risks around data privacy and data security, and a need for organizations to understand what they need to do to continue to work, but to do so in a manner that's compliant.
Great. And, speaking of, different perspectives from, 2009 to now, being starting a company after the financial crisis and now looking at it in a perspective of COVID-19, personally, as a CEO, for you, how have you been able to, how has this pandemic like switched your mindset, or, has anything changed so far in how you address various things throughout life, as opposed to, like, just your company?
I think on a company level, certainly in terms of ensuring, putting the well-being of those that work for us, making that a paramount priority, and it now just saying that we're not effectively going to do any projects that involve us having to work on site, at least in the short term and for the foreseeable future. So where we would have conducted some meetings face to face, now, because our clients, all of our clients are accustomed to doing that isn't really a challenge for us anymore. I think in terms of it highlights the need, ultimately taking it back to data protection, for the need to have business continuity and disaster recovery plans and policies in place that
Right.
look for the reasonably foreseeable disruptions that could be caused to your business. So I think as an entrepreneur, be it the financial crisis back in 2008, or COVID-19 now, or many other incidents and disasters that have occurred in between, it highlights the fact that change is a reality, and sometimes change can be disruptive, and with change comes threats, but there are also opportunities. So it's being quick off the mark to be able to pivot your business model to ensure that it is aligned with whatever the current market demands.
Great, thank you so much for that. So the General Data Protection Regulation, also known as GDPR, is a regulation in the EU law on data protection and privacy in the European Union. and the European Economic Area as well. So it also addresses the transfer of personal data outside the EU and EEA, but of course you already know this, but I'm just giving context to the audience that are listening to us today. What restrictions hinder such regulations getting enacted in Africa, given its unique economic opportunity?
In terms of restrictions, I guess at some levels, whilst that we have the African Union, the states are perhaps not as unified as within the European Union. So the ability to apply a blanket approach across Africa is not necessarily going to be fitting. I think also there's a need to understand that Africa is unique and needs to define what data protection and privacy means for Africa and for Africans. But at the same time, in order to embrace trade and to tap into the opportunities such as, the multi-billion-dollar EU single digital economy, it's going to be essential for African businesses, entrepreneurs, governments to ensure that there are frameworks in place that will allow data belonging to EU citizens, US citizens, Chinese citizens, whichever, within the global context, to allow that data to flow freely, to enable African entrepreneurs, tech startups, and established corporations to tap into those opportunities.
Right. So do you see any potential benefits of the equivalent laws for African entrepreneurs?
There are certainly, from my understanding at this point in time, having I was one of the first keynote speakers at Ghana's Maiden Data Protection Conference and their successive conference. I was in Mauritius, as you know, Savannah, where I met you, and I've also in Uganda have been doing some work with data protection. So I have a fair sense of how things have been developing on the continent. And broadly speaking, the laws are aligned, if not with GDPR, certainly at least the kind of core principles of data protection best practices. There are certainly variations as you would expect. I think that the benefits for entrepreneurs in ensuring that they are aligned with these the local laws as well as within the global context. I think increasingly it will be the case that businesses in Africa and government organizations will be requiring these things. Most nations on the continent now that either have enacted data protection laws or are in the process of doing so. So this will fast become an African reality.
This podcast is brought to you by Venture by ALU, a free course for entrepreneurs. Do you want to know how to overcome entrepreneurial challenges from real-life experiences? Well, Venture is an online course designed for young and aspiring entrepreneurs. It features more than 10 ALU entrepreneur leaders who will guide and inspire young entrepreneurs. You can find Venture on venture.alueducation.com. Once again, venture.alueducation.com. Venture, a course for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs. Now back to our conversation. Great. So I'm just going to get into some tech politics. I don't know if it's tech politics to you, but there's some backlash against Huawei by mainly Western countries, arguably due to security concerns. So technologies like mobile networks are key to accelerating our local innovations. So from your perspective as a cybersecurity expert, is this something the young entrepreneurs on the African continent should also get worried about? And if so, What precautions can they put in place to avoid this?
I think there's certainly a concern, if you would call it that, in the sense that there are already situations whereby let's take, for example, some companies don't deliver to some countries in Africa because of
Right.
fears of fraud. And therefore there would be a reluctance, one would assume, in some cases, to want to share personal data. So there is
Yeah.
a need to build trust in order for companies, institutions to be able to, let's say, for example, where things have been outsourced to China or to India or to other territories where, for all intents and purposes, there are efficiency gains to be made in terms of cost of labor, and tapping
Right.
into the genius minds of the people, and in the African context, that's there in abundance. But there needs to be that level of assurance in terms of, if somebody's going to do business with you and they're going to need you to have access to either their customers' data or their employees' data, they're
Right.
going to want that assurance.
So are we looking at it from a perspective of both parties have to do the KYC extensively for them to be able to, you know, be as cautious as they possibly can, as well as gain or bear fruit from the opportunities that they're getting?
Certainly. So, in terms of when outsourcing any data processing activity to any third party in whatever territory they may be in, there is a need to ensure you conduct, robust due diligence checks, security compliance checks, and assure yourself that that party, and not only that party, but any third party or fourth or fifth parties that they may subcontract activities to, have adequate data protection control measures in place. That from you mentioned the GDPR earlier. That is
Right.
a legal requirement of the GDPR. And within the context of that, the European Commission has designated specific countries that they consider to have adequate data protection laws in place outside of the EU and the EEA. And those countries are very limited in number. So there are no African nations, for example, that feature on that list. So in order to, at least from the perspective of the EU, to
Right.
satisfy EU organizations, they are legally obliged to have to put additional safeguards in place in order to process data in Africa or China or Russia or anywhere else that doesn't have laws that the EU considers to be adequate. So that then therefore will fall on each individual company or organization to have the appropriate checks and balances in place, and documentary evidence that key stakeholders will require.
Right. So it's common for a 20-year-old in Africa to launch a startup. But what data privacy and cybersecurity best practices should one put in place?
There are a number of different things to consider. I think first and foremost, it's important to look at the nature and the context of the data that you're processing, and the volume and the sensitivity, because
Yeah.
the measures you need to put in place should be proportionate to the risk. So if you're
Right.
a small business and you have few number of, very few clients, and you don't process particularly sensitive data, then basic things like having good training, but core privacy and data protection policies in place, making sure you keep that data secure by encrypting it at rest and in transit, ensuring that you use strong passwords, making sure you don't keep that data for longer than is necessary,
Yeah.
only restricting access to that data on a need to know basis, and ultimately securely destroying or archiving that data when it is no longer required. So through to if you're a global corporate organization, then it's likely to be far more complex for you in terms of the extent to which you are going to need to go in order to provide assurance that the data you process is being processed both lawfully and in a manner that is keeping that data secure from constantly evolving cybersecurity threats.
Right. Great. Thank you so much, Michael. Do you have any final words, any piece of advice that you may want to have for the entrepreneurs on the continent or the budding entrepreneurs on the continent?
Yes, certainly. So I would say, from the experiences I've been fortunate enough to have traveled across the continent and to have met many entrepreneurs and budding entrepreneurs, including ALU students. It really is a question of, I think for me, if I was to say one thing for me was, I always had a certain level of confidence and belief in myself, but it wasn't until I truly knew my own value and worth and took the step to say, well, this is how much I'm going to charge. This is our position in the market, and we're going to own that position. It wasn't until
Right.
I came to that realization myself until it actually happened. So it really, your biggest barrier to achieving your own success sometimes.
Right. Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for that, Michael. I think that marks the end of the podcast episode today. Thank you so much for being with us today and taking time to really, tell us more about your experience with GDPR, data privacy and cybersecurity, and, IG Smart and how you founded it and how it's grown over the, past 10 plus years, the awards it's gotten as well. So, yeah, we really appreciate you for being on here today.
It's been a great pleasure. Thank you very much.
That was Michael Abtar, award-winning CEO by day, keynote speaker by night, global data, privacy and protection expert throughout. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode, and you can find us on Spotify, Anchor, and Apple Podcasts for exclusive access to all the gems of knowledge we drop here. Remember to subscribe to this podcast on your preferred platform. This is the AOU podcast, Entrepreneurial Leadership in Africa, real stories, real experiences.